So I've just got in from work and I wanted to share my thoughts with you guys on a pretty interesting conversation that I had with an older guy today out on a construction site. There was a few kind of life lessons that came from the conversation. So that's what I wanted to go through with you guys today. So I was out on a construction site and it was raining and it was cold, and an older guy was assigned to me to show me around and kind of help me with what we were doing out on the site. And somewhere along the way, we got into a conversation about this guy potentially retiring. He ended up telling me that he was 62 years old and he was mentally and physically ready to retire. I said to him, "Have you thought about retirement?" And he said, "Oh God, I think about it all the time, but I just can't afford to retire now." He said, "I would have retired years ago, but the problem is I never thought about putting into a pension or anything like that when I was your age." I told him I was 30 years old. And he said, if I'd have thought about putting into a pension when I was your age, I'd have been retired probably 5 years ago. But because I never did, I'm still out on site in the rain, in the cold, and I will be for the next 5 years until I'm eligible for the state pension. After that, he asked me about my own situation, and I actually said to him that, I was lucky enough to work for a company that did quite a decent pension scheme where, I put in 10% and they put in 10%. And he couldn't believe that that type of offer was on the table for a young person like myself. And he said, "God, if I'd have been offered something like that at your age, I'd have snapped it up." And then he stood there for a second and went, "You know what? I probably wouldn't have actually, because when I was your age, there was no way I was thinking about pensions. I was thinking about flashy cars, nice clothes, eating out, holidays." He was like, "If I'm honest, I never even thought about a pension till I was in my mid to late 40s. And even then, I had a pension, but I didn't contribute anywhere near enough to it, which is why I'm in the position I'm in today." And I thought that was kind of like a really kind of bold thing to say, quite a brave thing to say, very honest of himself to kind of say that. But it's true, I guess, that he's in the position he's in today because of those choices that he made when he was my age. And he said to me, if I continue down the path that I'm on, doing the 10% into my pension, he said, by the time I'm his age, he thinks I'll have been retired at least 5 years or more, is what he said. Now, whether that happens, who knows? But God, I hope so. That is the plan. But it was really interesting. He also went on to say that if he'd have known, or if he'd have thought ahead, that he would be in his early 60s, still out on a building site, in the rain, in the cold, and had another 5 years or more ahead of him, he would have never gotten into the industry that he chose to get into at the time. But again, in the conversation we had, he said the reason why he got into it is at the time he wanted a job that paid well. And he's been in this industry pretty much his whole life. And he said the reason why he got into building in the first place is because it paid well. And at the time, all he was interested in was getting the money in his hand so he could go and splash it on whatever he wanted. Which is, to be honest, what a lot of young people are concerned about. They just want to get the cash and go and spend it on things they want. And, I completely understand that. And he said if he'd have had his time again, or if somebody would have told him that at 62 he would still be out on site, he would not have got into that job and he would have chosen something different. He said, "I would have chosen a cushy office job if he had his time again," is what he said. Now, who knows whether that would have, worked out for him, but you never know. Something else he said was that back in his day, when he was my age, so we're talking 30 years ago, he said nobody ever talked about pensions or retirement back then. People just used to say that it would take care of itself, that you'd do your time, you'd work hard in your job, and when you get to a certain age, you just retire and it just takes care of itself. And he said, people really need to be educated on the fact that, retirement doesn't take care of itself and that you do need to save and put money in a pension, or else you'll have no choice. that when you're his age, you will have to continue working. And I thought that was a really good point. So after that, we kind of left it and he went off and did his own thing and I carried on working. But the conversation stuck with me and I kind of took a few lessons from it. And I guess the first lesson is think about the career that you are getting into or that you might be in at the moment if you're kind of fairly young in your 20s or 30s, and think, if you had to stay in that particular career, is that something you can see yourself doing long term, or maybe even into your 50s and 60s? Because if it's not, then now is the time to make the jump and do something else, go down a different avenue. The guy told me today he is physically and mentally ready to retire and has been for years. And I don't blame him. He works a physically tough job every day out on a building and construction site. But like he said, he's not financially in a position to retire. And he's probably too old really to move into a different career or get another job that pays what his current job pays him. So he's stuck. And that is not a position that you want to be in. So whilst you're younger, think about, if you're intending on having a long career in the job you're in, is that a job you can see yourself doing in your 50s and 60s? And if it's not, make the change. The second lesson I took from the conversation was quite an obvious one. And that is, whilst you're young, make sure that you sort out your contributions into your pension and make sure you're contributing enough that is going to allow you to consider early retirement when you're older. Don't leave it in the background. Don't leave it and say, oh, I'll sort it later in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s. If you have a company that does a similar scheme to what mine does, like I do 10%, they do 10% for me. If you have something like that, make sure you max it out. And like I say, set it and forget it. And the third lesson of the day is potentially the most important one. And that is, you either sacrifice when you're young for the life that you want to live when you're older, or you live the life that you want to live when you're young, but you sacrifice when you're older. And to be honest, I think we both know that the correct way of doing it is you sacrifice when you're young so you can live a comfortable and stress-free retirement. But that only happens if you think about it whilst you're young and actually do something about it and say to yourself, yeah, I will go without things when I'm young, in place of that comfortable retirement that we are all working towards. But it won't happen on its own. It's something that you have to work towards. So that's it, guys. There's my 3 lessons for today. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and guys, I'll catch you in the next one.